Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Understanding Ableism webinar. One moment. All right, so today's webinar is on the topic of the ableist flaws of public transportation. My name is Lucy Burtz, and I use she, her pronouns. Short visual description, I'm a white woman in her 30s with long brownish hair and glasses. I am going to get started today by giving a little bit of housekeeping and accessibility info for today's webinar. Captions are available in Zoom. So click Show Subtitle in your Zoom menu bar to turn them on. Captions are, one moment, sorry. Apologies. Captions are also running at captionviewer.net. The URL is too long to read, but we'll paste it in the chat. Let's see, I'm seeing that. Sorry about that, one moment. We'll paste it into the chat, the caption viewer. Caption viewer also allows you to enlarge the font and change the color and contrast of the captioning. There's also a chat feature on caption viewer. So you're welcome to submit questions or comments there, and we'll monitor them and voice any questions during the Q&A breaks. ASL interpreters are available today. We'll be presenting in gallery view, so the interpreters should always be available. Let me put this on gallery view, one moment. Apologies. I'm going to put it on gallery view here in one moment, just so I can finish this housekeeping. You don't need to pin the interpreters. Please know that we have two interpreters. So if you pin the current interpreter, it could prevent you from seeing the active interpreter after an interpreter change. You don't need to be on Zoom to access this event. We'll read all questions out loud and voice any images on the screen, so the content will be available to individuals calling in on the phone or who cannot see the visual content. This event's being recorded. We'll answer questions periodically throughout the discussion. Please use the Q&A tab for any questions you have for the panelists. Please use the chat tab for general conversation and comments. Cart chat, caption viewer, can be used for both questions and comments. And lastly, we will use both person with a disability and disabled person interchangeably, recognizing different people's preferences for person first or identity first language. And now I will pass it over to Mariel. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mariel Woodley. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Outreach and Interpretation and Outreach and Education Coordinator at Disability Empowerment Center. My visual description is I'm a white woman with glasses and brown hair and a green shirt. Okay, so let me orient everyone to this event. This is the 9th session of the 2025 season for Understanding Ableism monthly series. These events are hosted by the King County Disability Consortium, which is composed of over 40 disability-serving organizations and individual disability advocates and activists. The Understanding Ableism events are led by the disability community, promoting disability justice within King County enterprise. In the 9th episode of Understanding Ableism series, we will be looking at the ways in which public transportation can be more accessible for people with disabilities. For the disability community, transportation in our areas can be quite rough at times. Even the ADA mandates that transit authorities to provide accessible transportation. Accessibility is not always prioritized with public buses, streetcars, and trains are made. The same is also true for stations that people load and unload at. Frequently, access bus drivers are late to pick up people with disabilities from their homes, making them late for work. Other issues public transit often faces is that mainstream bus stop at stations are not always accessible. Instead of door-to-door service, rideshare apps like Lyft are always an option. But, excuse me, as there are more rideshare drivers than people to and from places in an affordable way, they are more likely to do some suspicious stuff. For example, both Uber and Lyft have been under fire recently for many of their drivers denying service to people with guide dogs, citing that pets, when they are not actually pets, they're service animals. And blind people need to act as they need people to act as their eyes. Our transportation panel today is designed to teach public transportation workers without disabilities that when passengers with disabilities file complaints, they are depending on public transit authorities they contacted to make changes to their designs, attendees, attitudes, and policies to become more accessible and inclusive for the disability community. I will post a document to the chat with the questions that are asked in today's panel that everyone can see. And then I will ask the panelists to each introduce themselves with their names, pronouns, a visual description, where they live, and what their connection to this topic is. First up, can we please hear from Mandy West?
Hi, so I'm Mandy West. I am a white woman with short brown hair and brown eyes. I'm wearing a gray shirt that says Disability Empowerment Center on it. And I go by she, her pronouns. Oh, so you want me to go through the question first?
No, I will ask the questions later. I was just
Okay.
introducing you to everyone. Next up, please, Justin Steinberg.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Justin Steinberg. I am a white man with auburn red hair and bluish green eyes, coming to you from Palo Alto, California, which I believe is the land of the Ohlone people. I'm also wearing a red sports jersey for Special Olympics because actually today I'm going to be doing a flag football scrimmage through Special Olympics with the San Francisco 49ers. And given that a lot of people are from the Seattle area, I know that probably makes me very unpopular. I'm connected to this area because I've had to rely on public transportation to get to and from work.
Thank you very much. And next, Christine Dodson.
Hi, thanks, Mario. My name is Christine Dodson, and I go by she, them pronouns. I live in Lakewood, Pierce County. A white woman with gray curly hair and pink sparkly glasses and a beige and white striped shirt. I have connections with public transit since I've been a public transit rider since birth. So for 57 years. My parents, my mother didn't drive. I don't drive. And now in my later years, I've developed different age-related disabilities that have put me on transit, on public transit's shuttle system. So I've ridden both the public transit fixed route as well as the door-to-door services now.
Thank you. Next, we have Dean Sydnor.
Hello, my name is Dean Sydnor. I use he, him pronouns. I have brown hair and a brown beard. I'm a white man wearing blue glasses and a green sweater. I am joining this group today because I work for Hopelink's mobility management team. I also used to work for their non-emergency medical transportation team, which I imagine a few folks on this call may be familiar with. My focus is on transportation coordination around emergency events, and having worked with a lot of advocates in the region and centers for independent living like Disability Empowerment Center and the Centers for Independence, we've had a lot of feedback and a lot of input from these communities on how emergency response transportation efforts are inadequate to meet the needs of folks with access and functional needs. And we keep working with these partners to try to improve those response plans. So that's why I'm here today.
Great, thank you. We are excited to have everyone here. So I'm going to ask these questions in the order I introduced you. So first up is Mandy. The first question, in terms of commuting to work or school and back, what does your travel itinerary look like?
Before I go into the question, I just wanted to give it a little more of an introduction. I realized I didn't do that. So I'm an independent living specialist at Disability Empowerment Center, and I have epilepsy and cerebral palsy, so I don't drive. So everything essentially, and this goes right into the question, I use public transportation for everything in order to be independent. So that includes public buses, light rail, and if I can't use those, I have to pay money through Lyft. Let me see, is there anything else I wanted to mention about this? Yeah, so part of my work as an independent living specialist is to go on outreach events and sometimes even meet our participants in the community. So without public transportation, or I'm fortunate enough to also have access transportation in King County, I would not be able to go to certain areas for outreach or consumer meetings. So yeah, it's really been helpful, and I was fortunate enough to get access transportation, which is our paratransit van here in King County.
Thank you. And then Justin, in terms of commuting to work or school and back, what does your travel itinerary look like?
So, first of all, I forgot to mention that I use he, him pronouns. I actually am fortunate enough to work remotely as a Stanford research assistant because I used to use access paratransit here in the Bay Area. And I'll be talking about more on my gripes about that later. When I went to community college and ultimately San Francisco State University, I would either take a bus to get to and from community college. For my undergraduate work, I would often, I lived on campus, but when I would come home, I would take the Bay Area Rapid Transit, or BART. It's basically a subway system, and I would take Caltrain to get picked up. And then when I went on to get my master's degree in special education from San Francisco State, I just took Caltrain and BART, and either a bus that I had to pay or a free San Francisco State shuttle. But nowadays I mostly take Caltrain when I'm hanging out with a friend. I don't really have to use public transportation all that much.
Thank you. And then Christine, would you like to answer the question? In terms of commuting to work or school and back, what does your travel itinerary look like?
Well, since I've always been on public transit, um, I was lucky enough to be in the area and age of online education. So most of my education has been online, so that I didn't have to deal with public transit. Um, for jobs, I live in Pierce County, but the rate of pay is higher in King County. So for the past 10 years, I've chosen to work in King County. Um, that said, I've had to deal with not only Pierce Transit shuttle system, but King County shuttle system. And there's a lot of nuances between them. Um, Even though I'm going to King County, I have to book through Pierce County. Pierce County won't let me talk to King County. They do all the talking, and King County does all the booking. So it pretty much came out that I had to leave my house at 5:40 in the morning to get to work for 8:30 a.m. And coming home, I would leave about 3:30, 3:45, and I would be home about 6:45 at night. So if I were driving, it probably would have been 45 minutes to an hour. But since I have to rely on transit, it takes that ride to 3 hours long. Um, that's an extremely long itinerary. Um, I can't even be useful during those 6 hours a day because there's no Wi-Fi on those shuttle buses. There's Wi-Fi on fixed route in Pierce County that's free for everyone, but there's not on the shuttle service. So it doesn't mimic fixed route service, you know, perfectly. Um, but yeah, my travel itinerary back and forth to King County is quite long. Um, and there's really nothing you can do about it because you don't get to talk to any system except for Pierce Transit if you're down in the South End.
Thank you. And then next we have Dean. Dean, in terms of commuting to work or school and back, what does your travel itinerary look like?
Yeah, thank you. This is Dean. Thankfully, right now, I get a lot of leeway to work from home. But in my previous role at Hopelink, I had to work at their offsite desk at the Harborview Medical Center in downtown Seattle. This was at a time when I was living in Snoqualmie, Washington. So for folks that maybe aren't aware, that's a rural town many miles to the east of Seattle. I'm fortunate enough to be able to drive. So I would drive to Issaquah. Because there's no parking for staff at Harborview, I would take the Sound Transit bus all the way to downtown Seattle. I would get off roughly near the King Street station, and then I'd have a choice. I could either walk up the hill over the Yesler Bridge up to Harborview from that downtown area, or I could take the slower option and use the streetcar that runs from the International District Chinatown Station up First Hill, get off at the 9th and Jefferson building, and then walk to the main Harborview hospital for work. Both options were not ideal, especially when it was cold. But again, a lot of that was facilitated because I am fortunate enough to be ambulatory, so I could walk up the hill if I needed to. And that first leg, which would have been the most time consuming, I get to skip that really long local bus route ride from Snoqualmie to Issaquah, which runs very infrequently and testifies to kind of that lack of transit access that some of the more rural areas have in our community. In our work at Mobility Management, we have a lot of clients that often for affordability reasons are far from the urban centers, places like Seattle, Bellevue, downtown Tacoma. They're maybe living with family or friends or whoever they can in lower cost options far away from transit access. And if they don't have fixed route transit in their community, that means there isn't an ADA paratransit equivalent out there. And that can mean their connections are extremely limited. So I was fortunate enough to be able to make that commute work. But if you're someone in the Snoqualmie Valley that lives far away from the excellent local service that is Snoqualmie Valley Transportation, who I love, they do great work for that local community, or one of the metro bus routes, your options are really limited. So I was thankful. Thankfully, I was able to avoid that, but there's a lot of folks out there that aren't so lucky.
Thank you. And then the next question, starting with Mandy. Based on your travel itinerary, what is one part of the, I'm sorry, I'm also have a baby on my lap. Based on your travel itinerary, what is one part of it that can make you later for your start time than you would have liked in a way that is not your fault?
So firstly, most of my days, I live in Redmond, kind of on the border of Bellevue, Redmond. And then I go to downtown Redmond at the Together Center, and I either take the train, rapid ride, or my access van. On one day a week, I go to Seattle, to our Seattle office that is on East Jefferson Street. And I end up I have to go from, if I were doing it without access, I would have to take a bus to the light rail, cross over to, I think it's the 520 West, and then take a Sound Transit bus to downtown, and then another city bus, usually the 304, up to Jefferson or East Jefferson Street. Can you repeat your question? Because I'm just giving you background. Muriel.
Sorry,
Yeah.
my baby got crazy. Based on your travel itinerary, what is one part of it that can make you later for your start time than you would have liked in a way that is not your fault?
Okay, so based on what I've said about my commute, with access, firstly, they give you a window of time to wait, and sometimes they're either late because they're picking up other people along the way, or there's a number of reasons that they could be late to pick me up. I've had people not know exactly where to pick me up, and I've had to call dispatch, and then dispatch is overloaded, and so I'm on hold forever trying to figure out where where access is. So there are various situations like that, including traffic congestion that could make me late. And if I don't get up on time, and so even if I'm say, I need to catch a bus, but it's late, or I just don't prepare enough time to get up and get to a bus on quote unquote on time, then because it takes about an average of an hour and a half to get to Seattle, for instance, I'd be late for that. So I'm always having to plan ahead and make sure. Sometimes I have to make sure that I take an earlier bus or an earlier train to get somewhere. And then, of course, I'm waiting until my day starts. So, yeah, there's a lot of different things that can get in the way. And it could be related to the driver, to other people being picked up, to any traffic conditions, and also the transfers if I'm taking a regular bus, the transfers from one bus to another bus to another bus. Yeah.
Thank you. And then next, Justin, based on your travel itinerary, what is the one part of it that can make you later for your start time than you would have liked in a way that is not your fault?
So
Justin.
yeah. So I've also used Access Transit in the past, and one of the things that can make me get to work later than I would have liked is often we have to pick up other people, which is understandable. But again, I'm very fortunate now to work remotely, so I don't really have to deal with the headaches that come with having to take either public transportation or Access Transit. If I was to try and get to my job via public transit, I'd have to take the train, get off at downtown, and then take one of the free shuttles to the university, and then I'd have to walk. And as we get closer to daylight savings time ending, that is not ideal because I have a visual disability, and at night I basically have to use a white gate. So working remotely has actually reduced the stress of having to navigate public transportation.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Christine. Christine, based on your travel itinerary, what is the one part of it that can make you later for your start time than you would have liked in a way that is not your fault?
Just one? Just one? Um, Several things have already been mentioned by other respondents, like traffic patterns, inserts of rides, and incorrect scheduling. Um, one of the issues that I found recently, though, is that both King County Access as well as Pierce Transit Shuttle have both introduced AI systems for their GPS. So they're no longer allowed to use their own private GPS, and the old GPS systems that they had were completely put out, and they brought the new one in. However, they didn't like educate that AI system to what the old AI system knew or what the old system knew. So this is a good, for instance, I live just outside the gates of JBLM. There'll be somebody who needs to go to work at Madigan on a Pierce Transit shuttle. Well, the AI system will tell them to come pick me up first and then go on base. But I don't have ID to go on base. So when they go through the gate at JBLM, I have to exit the shuttle and sit at a bus stop on the base, which is like so against ADA regulations. It's not even funny. So I have to deboard the bus and sit at a bus stop while the driver takes the other passenger to Madigan for their job and then comes back 15 minutes later and picks me up. If AI were educated to do it correctly, they would drop that person off at Madigan and then come pick me up. So I've told the drivers, you need to let them know. You need to let dispatch know. And they say, oh, no, it's okay. It's not okay, because if nobody's teaching the new AI systems the correct way to do it, they're going to continue to do it incorrectly. So right now, my biggest take on what part could make me late is the new AI systems, because they're not telling people the right way to go. Other than that, that's this week's complaint.
Thank you, Christine. Next, we have Dean. Dean, based on your travel itinerary, what is one part of it that can make you later for your start time than you would have liked in a way that is not your fault?
Absolutely. These days, I mostly am just taking the C line for non-work related things. That's the C line, which is the rapid ride route that connects to West Seattle, where I currently live. Unfortunately, that route, I think about 7 months ago, had its frequency reduced. So you'll see, and this impacts my girlfriend these days more than myself because she works downtown. She's encountering a lot of buses that are already full by the time they reach her stop. Thankfully, she's ambulatory, and so she can pack in if she needs to. But imagine for a moment if she had maybe a power wheelchair that she needed to fit on the bus. You can't exactly, oh, I'm just going to squeeze right by you when it comes to those types of devices and needing to fit on a packed bus. So I think when you see general route frequency reductions that you're seeing on even rapid ride routes, it negatively impacts commuters across the board. For myself, when I worked out of Harborview and took those long Sound Transit bus rides, the biggest impacts that I would see were usually related to people having car accidents on the route as we're trying to get from one point to another. So, even if everything runs perfectly on your public transit route, you boarded on time, it wasn't full, and you happen to get a seat or you happen to be able to fit on standing, two drivers totally disconnected from the system that we rely on collide and gum up the whole works for everybody. And then, especially with my role working at Hopelink NEMT, because I'm now late to get to Harborview, I was the one sending those NEMT rides, dispatching people home after their appointments. So if you relied on that transportation service, because I was slowed down by an accident that wasn't even the fault of the transit agency, now your ride home is delayed because I couldn't get to that position on time. I think that, it's a testament to how dedicated transit lanes can really negate some of those driver-caused delays that you'll see. Bus-only lanes can really provide that increased speed that make taking public transit a better equivalent option or a more competitive equivalent option to driving, and really provides a bit more equity. When you don't have those lanes, not only are you competing with traffic and stuck in traffic and slowed down by individuals driving their cars, you're at the mercy of their accidents as well. So that was probably the biggest set of delays that I would see in my past commuting.
Thank you, Dean. Okay, the next question is, what is the significance of public transit in your lives? And what would your lives look like without it? First up, Mandy, please.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I rely on public transportation to be as independent as I possibly can be. So if I can't rely on public transportation, I would have to make sure that I had someone else to pick me up, whether it be a family member or a friend, or I'd have to take a Lyft, which is Lyft or Uber, which is like from where I live to just my work in Redmond, it's $20 one way. So I'd be spending all this money on Lyfts and things. And oftentimes I can imagine that I would be isolated in my house without being able, I can walk. I am able to walk, but not for very long distances. So I would be either limited in a certain area to where I could go on my own, or I'd have to rely on other people to drive me places. And for me, and this could be internalized ableism, but I feel really weird when I have to rely on other people. I feel like I have to apologize for them taking me to any destination, especially when it gets dark earlier or it's at night, nighttime where I'm doing some community event or something. So it's a huge deal for me.
Thank you for sharing that, Mandy. Next, we have Justin. What is the significance of public transit in your life? And what would your life look like without it?
So when I was going to college and everything, public transportation was a huge deal. And if I wasn't able to use it, I would have had to rely on like family members to give me a ride. Because I work remotely though, I don't need public transportation as much. Although if I didn't have it, like the train, it would be harder for me to hang out with a friend like that lives up north from me. But generally speaking, I'm able to get rides from family members to like my Special Olympic stuff, band practice on Monday nights because it's in the evening. So I'm fortunate. I'm in a situation where if for some reason I didn't have public transportation, it wouldn't be quite as negative of an impact. But I definitely appreciate having public transportation just in case I ever do need to use it.
Thank you for that. Next, Christine. What is the significance of public transit in your life? And what would your life look like without it?
I would be a shut-in if I didn't have public transit. There's nobody in Washington that that's in my circle that drives. Like I have an adult son, but he doesn't drive either. He takes the bus. Um, I mean, absolutely everything I do is done by public transit. My laundry, my food shopping, going to the vet, going to the doctor. If there was no public transit or shuttle service, I do know I could fall back on paratransit through my insurance company and at least get to doctor's appointments. Um, but as for food shopping and just general outings, I would have to be relying on taxi cabs or Lyft, which are like way out of my price range for transit. I'd be like, no. I'd be more apt to shop at my Food Desert Mr. Lee store than take a Lyft into town. Um, but either way, I would be severely financially impacted if there was no public transit.
Thank you. And then next, Dean. Dean, what is the significance of public transit in your life? And what would your life look like without it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work in mobility management. So even though I don't have to utilize public transit as much for my current job, I use the various public transit resources just to help problem solve for others who have essential places they need to go and non-essential places that they want to go. Because I think a big distinction, and you've heard it in some of the testimony here, is that part of having a transportation system that we deserve is not just getting where you need to go, but being able to go where you want to go when you want to go there. That's like a big part of equity. If I can drive a car, I can go hang out with my friends whenever I want. I can go watch the Mariners game at the bar and cry with the rest of them when they lose. If I want to. If you're someone who relies on public transportation, if it's not quick, safe, and reliable, you don't have that social connection. It can be extremely isolating. I work in emergency transportation coordination, and we're coming up to winter weather. Once snow gets on the ground, it pushes a lot of people that maybe would normally walk or roll to maybe public transit resources, or maybe their car suddenly doesn't start and they find themselves becoming a non-driver unexpectedly. They may still need to get to things that are essential, like dialysis appointments, cancer appointments, methadone appointments. Part of my work is, connecting with public health and healthcare facilities to make sure these clients are getting to these critical medical appointments. And if we didn't have public transit resources like paratransit, who are willing to be flexible when asked in emergency situations to relax some of their eligibility requirements, to go out of their way to get people they wouldn't normally get, during these emergency contexts, then there would be people not making those appointments. They wouldn't be going to dialysis. They wouldn't be getting their cancer treatment. They would miss their methadone appointments. And those are life-sustaining needs that one can't go without for very long. So the options for those folks would be, if public transit didn't exist, either take those life-sustaining negative impacts, or rely on emergency services to get you to those places, ending up in the ER. And that's, neither of those outcomes is what we want to happen. So public transit for me in my work is that essential link that gets folks to those critical services, and then also just gets them where they want to go, which is very important to folks' lives. But yeah.
Thank you very much. On the next question, starting with Mandy. If you could improve any aspect of public transit to make it more accessible for you, what would it be and why?
I love that they have created light rail. As most people in Seattle, I think I would like it. I'm looking forward to when it's ready to cross the bridge from the east side to the west side. I do have a kind of a side note, but it's related. I'm aware of, I don't know what I want to call it, but people in cars having major privilege to the point that if they didn't have their car, they would not use light rail, for instance. And that scares me because, one, it shows not, it's very ableistic, in general, but also if we don't have enough riders on the light rail that we have here in the Seattle area, the light rail could be one of those things that are cut. And to me, more than buses and even more than access sometimes, I feel like light rail really is very accessible, because you just have to know what the stops are and you get off and you have an elevator, it takes you down where you need to go. And that works for me. So I'm just, I guess what I'm saying is I'm scared of losing those types of resources. I would like to see more ridership, I guess is where I'm coming from, and less ableism around cars and people being impatient on the road. Similarly, as a pedestrian, I get scared because there are a lot of people on the road that just don't care and don't stop for you or slow down. And I've heard a lot of my friends and coworkers talking about like having really close calls, and some of them actually being in accidents because cars didn't stop at crosswalks, for instance. One of the things I often worry about is like especially in rural areas where there's no pavements or sidewalks. And so without the sidewalks, it's very dangerous. And so it would be nice, like I'm thinking about in this part of town, Redmond, there's East Lake Sammamish, which is a very long stretch of road. And it's, you have trees on either side, no sidewalk. And I happen to have a person that I go to visit her that lives right there. My family lives down the street from there. I would never feel comfortable walking there or even going close to there because of the fact there's no sidewalks. And so it's inaccessible to me. So having more accessibility is part, and I guess what I'm getting at is like with the infrastructure, like the actual building of wide enough sidewalks and better lighting. I actually even like the idea of, and I know I don't think they've done this before. They on bus stops, they'll have like lights, like with Rapid Ride, they'll have lighting, which is all great and dandy. But when it gets really cold, they don't have heaters, and, like some kind of heating system for when you're in the bus area. And I would love that. That would be really great, especially during winter months, like I said. I feel like I'm going on some tangents. Let me see. Yeah, so, oh, and then in relation to access, from what I've seen, not just for myself, but for my consumers is that they're very strict in their screening. So unless you're like, and even, gosh, I don't know, the occupational therapists really want to see that you're completely incapable of getting around. And so either you have to imagine yourself in your worst case scenario, like in my case, having had a seizure and being disoriented, or having had, you know, legs or like really problems with my foot or my legs to the point where I wouldn't be able to take a step, you know, even up the bus ramp for me to even be accepted as an access rider or, you know, whatever the county paratransit is, depending on if we have to cross counties and stuff. So, and they probably do that to, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of reasons why they do that, but it makes it difficult for people that could really benefit from, you know, paratransit. It makes it difficult for them to get around too. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. And then next, Justin. If you could improve any aspect of public transit to make it more accessible for you, what would it be and why?
So one of the biggest things, there's actually a couple things I would do. One, buses on weekends, they would come a little bit more frequently than maybe once every hour, just because that wait time, if you miss one bus, you're stuck. I mean, I get that ridership might be a little bit lower, so maybe that's why, but you still gotta get buses out there on weekends. Another thing, and this is actually related to my experience with paratransit, I live pretty close to Stanford, like 10, 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, depending on traffic. When I last used it to get home from work, it took me over an hour to get home. We actually had to go up to like another city to pick up a passenger and then drop them off before I could get home. And it should never take more than like an hour at most, if that. No, half an hour. So I would actually insist, like, I would make it so like you would pick up and drop off people based on like how close they are to like their home. So like if you're coming home from work, like if don't go all the way to another city with a passenger who's trying to get home from like when they're only like 10 to 20 minutes away from home, because that's really inconvenient, especially if they're like gonna have dinner when they get home. Yeah, so that's one of my biggest complaints, is having to take an unnecessarily long commute from work when you don't live that far. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Then Christine, if you could improve any aspect of public transit to make it more accessible for you, what would it be and why?
Oh boy, am I opinionated on this one. First and foremost, as a Pierce Transit and King County Access rider, where have all the benches gone? They've taken away all the benches that used to have cute little signs that said, "This is where the shuttle picks you up." They've done this because of the homeless situation in Pierce and King counties. That's the same reason that we lost the heaters at the bus stops, Mandy. Um, the One of the main issues that I have with inter-county going from Pierce to King on a shuttle service is that I wish that the inter-county rides would not accept intra-county inserts. So, for example, I've gone already from on Pierce Transit from my house to Federal Way, and now I get on the next leg of my route, which is going to be King County Access. And then instead of going right into dropping off all those inter-county passengers they just picked up, they'll go around to like other places and pick somebody up in another city before they start taking us to our drop-offs. And we've already been sitting on the shuttle for an hour and a half, which leads me to my next complaint, which is that the access services that we have, access and shuttle, those type of services are supposed to be based on ADA regulations, they're supposed to be mimicking fixed route. Now, yeah, I can complain all I want about the Wi-Fi, but we know that that's just sidebar. The times are not mimicking fixed route. I could get from my house to the Disability Empowerment Center much, much quicker on the train, on the Sounder train, than I would be able to using the access services. It surely would not take me 3.5 hours if I was taking the Sounder. It takes about 45 minutes plus another bus. So that's one of my issues. I think that both the inter-county issue with the inserts, as well as the fixed route mimicking timeframes, are both a part of the problem that when Sound Transit was created in 1997 to cover Snohomish, King, and Pierce counties, the ridership was much, much lower. The populations were much, much lower. And at that time, the Department of Transportation said, okay, you can let each one of those counties handle the paratransit access shuttle service for their own counties. And Sound Transit, even though they're their own transit company, they don't need to offer a mimic service for disabilities. We're going to let each individual county continue to provide their services. And that led to us having to have hand-to-hand service between Pierce and King and Snohomish, instead of having an inter-county shuttle service that can take somebody without stopping in Federal Way or without stopping up north by Snohomish. You would just have a smooth sailing ride, just like a 500 level bus goes from Olympia to Seattle. So that's one of my complaints. It needs to be revisited. 1997 was a long time ago, and a lot of things have changed in the region. I think that the shuttle service and the way it is implemented for Sound Transit needs to be revisited. And that's what I'm sticking to.
Thank you so much. Next up, Dean. If you could improve any aspect of public transit to make it more accessible for you, what would it be and why?
Oh, it's so hard to pick one. I think we've had a lot of great examples so far. I concur, like faster, more frequent service is obviously going to have the greatest benefit for the most people. Funding transit properly so we can get enough drivers and enough vehicles out there is a big thing. Infrastructure improvements around sidewalks, heaters, seating, and I think bathrooms is another neglected point around public transportation. There's not enough public restrooms at a lot of these facilities. For me, though, I think the most salient point is around a term called transit-oriented development. For folks who may be unfamiliar with that, basically when we're investing all of this money to build out new expensive light rail stations, big rapid ride bus stations that, we're getting the Sound Transit Stride bus rapid transit on the east side that's coming in the next few years. If we're making all these investments to get these resources built, we need to make sure that we're building lots of dense ADA accessible housing around these resources so that folks that are living with disabilities can actually just live close enough to them to use them. The light rail is great, but if you can only afford to live in your family's home in Stillwater, King County, which is not on any real route for anything, it doesn't really do you much good. So I think there is building out these resources is great, but if you're not building out the accompanying housing to allow folks to take advantage of it, to affordably live inside of a distance where they can actually use them, then it's not much use to anyone. So, yeah, building out the 2-line and connecting the light rail across the lake is going to be great. But if I still need to take an unreliable, infrequent bus to connect from my rural town to get all the way into Redmond to maybe catch the right train to get to my work in downtown Seattle, your situation isn't much improved. Likewise, out here in West Seattle where I live, we will hopefully eventually get this West Seattle link extension coming our way. If I live further away from Junction, I might have to traverse sidewalks whose maintenance is maintained by the individual property owner in front of that piece of sidewalk. And some of them don't do a good job of maintaining it. And if you're I'm lucky enough to be able to walk across those without much issue. But if you're someone who's rolling in a manual or power wheelchair and you're experiencing this infrastructure decay around sidewalks because a property owner hasn't maintained it, wouldn't it just be so much better if there was affordable, dense housing next to the train station so you didn't have to engage in that odyssey of horribly maintained sidewalks to get where you wanted to go to transit? What if you could just live close to it and hop on it whenever you wanted to get where you wanted to go? I think that's the other component beyond just improving the services themselves. I think building the community and developing the land around these stations is critical to making sure folks with access and functional needs can actually use the services we're paying for.
Thank you very much, Dean. And if any of our guests have questions for the panelists, please enter them in chat or raise your hand, and I will, I can ask them or I can call on you and unmute you to ask your question. While people are thinking of it, though, I would like to ask Christine specifically. Christine, you are suing Pierce Transit for violating the ADA. Can you explain more about why?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, you're suing the Pierce Transit for violating the ADA, correct?
There's been many things of looking into them and several issues over the past year. One actually happened at the end of the summer as well. The first was I was on shuttle and I was getting ready to, and this was Pierce Transit shuttle. I was coming into work into Seattle, and I was sharing the shuttle with a couple, an older couple. The wife was the husband's caregiver, and the wife had a walker, but she was sitting in a seat. The husband was in a mobility chair, an electric mobility chair. So the wife puts her walker on first and she sits behind me. The husband gets on the bus in his chair. The driver goes to put the shoulder belt on the passenger, and the passenger says, "No, I don't want that belt." And the driver said, "Too bad. It's my bus. It's my ride. You're wearing the belt." And I said, "Excuse me, but he has a lap belt on his chair. That shoulder belt's not necessary. The shoulder belt does not hold the chair onto the vehicle. It merely holds the patient in the chair." I said, "That's a manual restraint and it's illegal. A nurse would be fired for that." And he completely ignored me, completely ignored the wife and the patient, got in his seat and drove away. So that has been reported. I've been told everything from "this is the way our seating is" to "that's the way we've always done it" to "this is the way we've been trained" to "this is the way our seating structure is." Well, after investigating and being an ADA educator for a year, that's not the case. The ADA agrees with me. The only way that the transit company can mandate that shoulder belt is if everybody else who's riding on that vehicle is also required to wear a shoulder belt, which would have meant me, the wife behind me, and the driver. None of us have access to shoulder belts. We have access to waist belts that go across our lap. That's what the gentleman already had on in his wheelchair. So there's that issue. I also encountered another issue of access drivers, King County access driver, who was taking payment for rides from Pierce Transit riders. And that's not how it works. She argued with me about it, and then she took money from the two people sitting behind me that boarded after me. She was reported, and I do believe she was let go because it was a situation of she's asking this money from everybody she can that was coming from Pierce Transit, and she knew she wasn't supposed to collect from them. There was one other. Oh, yeah. Then there was the lady I didn't report who was picked up 2 hours late from the hospital in Seattle. And that was 2 hours after she called and said, my shuttle hasn't arrived and it's an hour late. So 3 hours she sat. She was in a mobility device, and she also was deaf and used sign language. So she's complaining, trying to complain to the driver about this. 2 hours, she's saying, 2 hours I wait. He says, I can't understand you. I said, well, I just took two years of that. So I can. So I was very happy to interpret for her that she was none too happy to have waited for 2 hours. And why doesn't he have pen and paper to communicate with his people on the bus? There's just so many things I've seen over the past 5 years of riding on shuttle that if I could write a book, it's almost every ride where there's something that should have been addressed in training, could have been addressed in training. Do you put the seatbelt on somebody on a lift if they're standing? No, you don't. But they do in King County. So it's just, so many open lawsuits that have been referred over. And, I just keep sending them over to that one law firm that I found that handles public transportation issues. I'm like, here, have at it, because there's just too many. Just too many. Oh, and the last one was a shuttle driver on Access. He would pick up me at deck, and then we would go over to Lighthouse and pick up Marcus. And then Marcus and I would go to Federal Way. 2 times we had this one particular driver who decided he was going to make a pit stop on the way to Federal Way. The first time he stopped at Starbucks and went in and bought himself a latte, locked us in the shuttle, never said a word to us, just went into the Starbucks and left us on the bus. He came out, and when I said, oh, that's nice, I would have liked a latte too. And he said, oh, I had to use the restroom. I said, oh, and you just had to stand in line for the coffee too, right? Not a week later, we have the same driver, Marcus and I, on the bus, and this guy goes and stops at Rally's, Checkers, whatever that place is, the little convenience store thing. He stops in there, same thing, picks himself up a snack and a drink, gets back on the shuttle. Marcus and I are looking at each other like, do you believe this guy? Like, doesn't he realize this is illegal? Thank God Marcus and I have our wits about us and didn't deboard the bus and go get lost in the neighborhood, because we very easily could have. Like, this guy just does not understand his job and his role and his responsibility. That's all there is to it. But I certainly wouldn't want a relative of mine with dementia to be riding with this guy, because God knows where he's going to let him off at or stop. So yeah, there's a lot of issues, and I think that most of it stems from training. But I just keep on sending my feedback.
Thank you so much, Christine. The next question I have is for Link Light Rail users. Which station do you think is the most accessible and why? And which station do you think is the least accessible and why? Whoever wants to go first, please.
Hi, it's Mandy here. I have to think about this. I like the light rails where you have where you don't actually have to cross over the actual rail, like it has an elevator and you can cross the other side without actually having to walk through the gate, and be worrying about the train. If I had to come up with the specific stations, I can't think of it right now.
This is Dean. It's hard for me to pick out exact stations that aren't accessible. I did get a tour of the upcoming Federal Way light rail extension. I think their new some of their stations that have yet to open yet. I do like how a lot of those are going to be having public restrooms, which is not the case in a lot of other stations. I find a lot of the elevated stations do feel a bit narrow, especially some of the newer ones on the Linwood light rail extension. It feels like if you had like two power wheelchairs side by side, they would maybe struggle for space to get by each other, which I don't love, especially on an elevated platform next to exposed light rail stations. I think it presents some potentially unsafe issues. I find that maybe the downtown underground stations have much wider platforms that I feel folks can move about a bit more easily. So again, it's hard to point out exact stations and exact issues, but I think access to restrooms and wide platforms with good tactile wayfinding are best practices. And when you lack restrooms or your tactile wayfinding isn't great, or you have to cross a lot of streets or cross a lot of things to get to those stations, that's where there can be a lot of issues. Narrow platforms are not good. That's just some of my takeaways.
Thank you. And if there's no other light rail users that have opinions on this, then I will move on to the next one. The next question is for paratransit users. In what ways are paratransit better or worse compared to rideshare apps like Lyft and more well-known methods of public transportation?
Hi, it's Mandy again. Do you want to go? Does someone else want to go? Okay.
Yeah. Justin, go
Yeah.
first.
Yeah, this is Justin Steinberg here. In some ways, I think paratransit is a little bit worse just because it's very they often, in my experience, run kind of late, and there's actually been in my area there's been a bit of a driver shortage. And as I said, sometimes when I use them, it can take me over an hour to get home. Whereas I've used Lyft to get to. Actually, the last time I used Lyft, I was going to a medical conference in Arizona, and it was actually super smooth sailing. Definitely on the pricier side, but no issues with any delays or any of that. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely will not use Lyft too frequently because of how expensive it is, and I will give paratransit an advantage there because they are pretty cheap. And actually, because of the paratransit card, I can take the buses in my area for free. But in terms of reliability, I've actually had a much more positive experience with the Lyft.
Thank you. Mandy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think this may have been mentioned earlier, but the way sometimes for access in this case, the way they do the plan the routes, where it sometimes goes all the way around instead of and takes drops someone off when it, like essentially past your place or your area, and then they have to go right back again to drop you off. And then instead of an hour, say, on access, you spend like 2 hours on access, and then not necessarily. I mean, when it's not necessary. And drivers don't question it. They just do what, you know, well, understandably they do what they're told. But then it's like, I actually had someone during a ride say, drop Mandy first. I'm farther down from where she lives. It doesn't make sense. So that driver actually listened and connected with dispatch, to make sure it was okay. But I don't know who's planning the routes. And then the other thing that I noticed is that sometimes when drivers don't seem to have training around how to not just to have general customer service skills, it's kind of like really being personable, or like actually acknowledging the riders. And some people are just very like, sit down, don't talk, you know, don't even really listen if someone says something. And I kind of wish there was more training around that, not just the like how do you ride the bus safely. And then unfortunately, because a lot of drivers are of another culture, they don't always speak English, so there's a lack of communication between the rider and the driver, and potentially dispatch. So yeah, it can be kind of frustrating at times because of those reasons.
Thank you very much. And then we have a couple comments.
Oh,
in-
I had some.
Oh, Christine, yes, please.
Um, I've had experiences where it was better to take Lyft than to take shuttle. And I hesitate to say paratransit because paratransit is actually something completely different from shuttle. Shuttle services are meant to take people to work, to school, to shopping, to events. Paratransit is for doctor, dentist, and mental health appointments and should be scheduled through your insurance company. Every county has a paratransit, and that's who your medical appointment should be going through. Shuttle services should be reserved for your outings, your work, school, and outings. But it doesn't work that way, and it's supposed to. And the ACA, when that went through, the Affordable Care Act, has provided for paratransit services for everyone who has Medicare and Medicaid services. So anybody with Medicare and Medicaid should not be taking shuttle to go to dialysis, for instance. They should be scheduling paratransit to take them there. That's one of my biggest beefs, is that they don't follow what was put forth. That was put forth from the feds and through the Department of Transportation to make that separation, but it's not followed at all. But anyway, I digress. I have had a chance where I had to take Lyft because paratransit or shuttle services just weren't available. For instance, I've lived here for 25 years. I have not been able to see live fireworks since I moved here because I can't get home because the bus stops at 10 o'clock. And if the bus stops at 10 o'clock, the shuttle stops at 10 o'clock. So I can't be out and about and do grown up things. I was unable to go to BJ's Bingo for my birthday a few years ago because the shuttle would have had to pick me up at 8 p.m. to bring me home. 8 p.m. And I'm in my 50s. So that just doesn't work. Sometimes you have to take a Lyft. So a couple years ago, I wanted to go see the Temptations at the Puyallup Fair. The concert was at like 6:30. I knew it wasn't going to be over until like 8 something. There was no way shuttle was going to come pick me up and take me home. And I ended up using airline points that I had to get a hotel room. And I got Lyft to take me from the Puyallup Fairgrounds to the hotel that was in Puyallup. So sometimes it's just necessary, and there's nothing you can do about it. there have also been times like uh, during the pandemic when shuttle services weren't available. And I still worked through the pandemic, but they were sending an alternate company called MedStar at the time. And I had a sexual harassment case with one of the drivers from MedStar. So uh, I don't necessarily trust outside agencies for my rides.
Thank you very much. And then a couple comments in the chat are regarding the elevators not working, the platforms being slippery, and inaccessible. And then also I see the Dean. You have your hand raised. If you'd like to.
Yeah, I just have a short comment. Christine's comment brought another topic that I think some people might resonate with. Is a lot of the names for this stuff is really confusing. I work in mobility management, and you heard Christine referring to paratransit and shuttle. And in Pierce County, paratransit services is the non-emergency medical transportation service, so they're NEMT. Whereas when you think of paratransit in King County, where I live, that's like Metro Access. That's the equivalent of their shuttle. Pierce Transit Shuttle is their ADA paratransit. Paratransit Services is the proper noun name of the company that does NEMT. And if you're in King County, if I say paratransit, you think Metro Access, and you'd think Hopelink NEMT is your NEMT provider. So you see how the names for the jargon and the names in the transportation and transit space can get so confusing. And I think one of the ways that we're trying to cut through this in mobility management is we're working on the Find a Ride tool for Pierce, King, and Snohomish counties. I threw a link to it in chat. They're working on setting up an accessible trip planner. Think of it as like a Google Maps that doesn't just show driving and fixed route buses. It'll also have things like non-emergency medical transportation, ADA paratransit. It'll have your volunteer driver services, and it will serve all three of those counties with all of those folks sending data feeds. So if you live in your community, you can type in your trip and you can see what service areas that you're in for different services. So you don't have to understand all these names. It'll just show you which services apply to the areas that you live in. And I think that's a good, it's called a one call, one click tool. So there's the virtual version of the tool, and then also there's a number that folks can call that will help direct them to some, if the web tool doesn't work for them and their particular accessibility needs, the phone number is that kind of supplementary resource that will also connect them with appropriate transportation options. But I think that's the confusion and the jargon and the names can just get so overwhelming for a lot of folks. And I work in the space, and even I get confused by it sometimes.
A lot of it too, Dean, is that the people who have the Medicare and Medicaid don't need to be paying that $1.75 per ride. That would save them. And if somebody's going to dialysis 3 times a week at $3.50 a day, come on, man. That's a lot of money per month. That's your electric bill. People need to know that they can call their insurance companies and get paratransit services for free. And it's not being put out there. People are riding shuttle services.
Absolutely, yes. And even if they can take fixed route transit, the NEMT services, they will often reimburse or provide payment for fixed route transit. Well, so maybe you don't have a disability that prevents you from taking fixed route transit, you can still get those trips subsidized to your medical appointments.
Thank you very much. There is one question in the chat from Colin. The reason why light rail extension between Seattle and the east side keeps getting delayed is because of problems with how the tracks were attached to the floating bridge. With that in mind, how much more effective would building a separate bridge have been for the Seattle to the east side light rail connection?
I don't work for Sound Transit, so I can only speculate as to how expensive and intensive a separate bridge would be. What I do know, I've had I joined a meeting with the previous Sound Transit CEO, and I think something that they've learned is that they're looking to do future projects more from proving concepts than from engaging in new ideas. So like this line across a floating bridge, no one's ever done that before in the entire world. And when you are the first person to try something, it can create new problems. Some of them probably, I think we can all, I don't work for Sound Transit. I think we all know some of those probably could have been avoided. But a lot of it comes from just trying something that no one's done before. And something that they're looking at going forward with future projects is engaging with more off-the-shelf solutions and proving concepts. Hopefully that will mean we don't see these massive delays in future extensions. But yeah, hindsight being what it is, maybe there could have been better solutions for that bridge. I'm sure Sound Transit would probably admit that. But having talked to some of the folks in my current role that work at Sound Transit, I think they, took some lessons about maybe trying more proven solutions first for their future work.
Thank you very much. And then before we adjourn, I would like everyone who attended today to please take a moment to provide us some feedback. You can either access a quick survey via the QR code in the PowerPoint or via the link in the chat that I will post right now. It should take you less than 5 minutes, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Hi again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. So as a reminder, this event was recorded, and you can view the video later at Disability Empowerment Center's YouTube channel. I'm going to post the link in the chat for everyone. There we go. Our November webinar will be about the importance of assistive technology. It will take place on Tuesday, November 18th. Thank you so much again for coming, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.